Hello, I'd like to continue discussing this 1040A form that we completed for Kenya and Robin Omar. If you recall, they had a child, and they're a couple of working folks, so chances are they needed somebody to watch their child while they went to work. And if they had paid for childcare, then those expenses are deductible. We can actually reduce our tax burden if we take the time to fill out a secondary form to which we're entitled. Now, in this scenario, if you recall, we did not take that credit on line 31, and that was okay because while we owed $14,871 in taxes, the government has already collected $14,900 in taxes from us. So we were entitled to a $93 tax return. And some people are just fine with that. They get a tax return, they're happy, and they're ready to move on. Other people are pretty picky and they'd say, well, I'd really like to maximize this return. So let's see if we can get some more money back for them. Basically, all that you need is a daycare or qualified caregiver to report to the government the amount of money that you've spent in daycare and other expenses to care for that dependent. In this particular case, we have a daycare called the Walnut Creek Daycare Center. So that's the name of the provider. So we squeeze that here into line 1. We need to provide their address. And their address is 1234 Sum Street, Walnut Creek, Ohio, 44216. And they have what's called an employer identification number provided to us. Now, all of this information would be supplied by the daycare in a form called a W-10 form. At the end of the year, they would have provided a W-10 form to any parent that paid money to the daycare. If you are paying a nanny or somebody specifically for care, you can use their social security number. But this employee identification number acts like a social security number, but it's a number for a business rather than a person. Now, don't be shocked when I tell you this, but Robin and Kenya spent $8,064 on daycare last year to put their child in daycare while they went to work. This is approximately $155 per week. And believe it or not, that's right on par. In fact, it might even be on the low end of what it costs to send a child to daycare. So anyway, they spent $8,000 on childcare, and so they'd like to see if they're entitled to any help on their tax forms. So there's our starting information. Let's answer some questions next. First off, after we provide this info, we need to answer one question. Did you receive any dependent care benefits? What this means is, did anybody help you pay for your child care? Did you receive a grant? Was it part of a scholarship, etc.? If you simply paid out of pocket like the Omars did, then we're going to say no, we did not receive any assistance. And if that's the case, then we only complete part 2. Now, part 2 is right here on this first sheet. I zoomed out here so that you can see that. This is all of part 2. If we needed to complete part 3, well, that's on the next page. Again, we don't complete part 3 because it doesn't apply to this couple. We're only going to complete this part 2, and we'll move forward from there. There is a good cautionary note here. If you are paying somebody to provide care for your child, but they do so in your own home, this is more or less a nanny, then you may owe what's called employment taxes because you are the employer hiring somebody to work for you rather than hiring or paying a service outside of the home. So if that applies to you, you can't actually use this 1040A form. So in this case, make sure that the money that you claim for child expenses is paid to somebody outside of your home. Well, part 2 tells us to first list the name of the person that received this care. Our scenario didn't give a name to the child, so I'm going to call this child name Omar, and I made up a social security number for this child. Of course, you would use the real thing if you knew what it was. And all $8,064 was spent for this child. If there were two kids, we would list both of their names and the cost for the second child as well, and we would continue to follow the instructions. Part 3 says to add the amounts of or the amounts that are in column C, so this last column here, but don't enter more than $3,000 for one qualifying person or $6,000 for two or more persons. Well, that's kind of interesting because even though we spent $8,000 on this child care, the instructions here are telling us to don't put any number greater than 3,000 for each person. So I'm going to write down 3,000. Okay, well, let's see where that takes us next. For step 4, it says to enter your income. Now, we could go to the instruction booklet, but if you recall from the other videos, I said that the person that's writing or filling out this tax form is listed first, and then if we make reference to a spouse, then they're listed next. So line 3 is asking for your income. Well, the you in this scenario is Robin. So let's double check. Robin's income was $65,120. That's the number that I'm going to place in line 4. Okay, so there's Robin's income reported there on number 4. Number 5 then goes on to say if you're married and filing jointly, then enter your spouse's earned income. Now this is where we get to enter Kenya's earned income. And if we jump back and look at Kenya, the earned income there is $52,126. $52,126.76. So in this particular worksheet, we did not have to add those two numbers together. We're listing them separate because the instructions in line 6 tell us to go on to enter the smallest of lines 3, 4, or 5. 3, 4, or 5. So which of those is the smallest? Well, the smallest one was line 3, so I'm going to enter the number 3,000. Next, line 7 says to enter the amount from Form 1040, line 38, Form 1040A, line 22, or Form 1040NR, line 37. Well, we're not completing the long Form 1040, so I don't need that information. We're not completing the 1040NR, so I don't need that. But what I do need is line 22 from the 1040A. So as we were working through the 1040A, we got to the point where we had a number in line 22. So this value gets reported on the child tax form. And we'll jot that down here in space number 7. All right, so there's the number from line 22 on our 1040A form. Moving on, step 8 says to enter on line 8 the decimal amount shown below that applies to the amount on line 7. Well, line 7 was $119,000, so I'm looking for the section where $119,000 falls. Well, here we go. $119,000 is over $43,000 up to no limit. So it's not in between any of these two numbers that are provided along the way. Here we're stuck with the 0.20 decimal. So 0.20. Okay, so we're getting close now. Line 9 says to multiply line 6 by the decimal that we wrote down in line 8. If you paid 2016 expenses in 2017, then see the instructions. So if we paid expenses for last year, this year, then we would go ahead and report that, but that doesn't apply to us. So we'll just do the math as indicated for step 9. We need the number in line 6, 3,000, and multiply that by 0.20. So 3,000 times 0.20 comes out to $600. All right, so in this step number 10, it says to enter our tax liability limit. Now, I'm not real familiar with that, so I would have to look it up. But as I keep reading, it says enter the amount from the credit limit worksheet that's in the instructions. So it tells us to go to the instruction booklet anyway. Whether you're familiar with it or not, you've got to go out there and get this information. So we have the instruction booklet provided to you for this week. So this is what that one looks like. I'll try to fit that in the screen here if I can. And again, this is the instruction booklet for this form that we're working on, 2441. And we've got to jump down to where it's talking about the instructions in line 10. Went a little bit too far. Here are the instructions for line 10 over here on the left-hand side. My pen doesn't work on this page, so I'm not going to be able to write anything down here, but it's only 3 steps. We're going to take the number from the form 1040A, line 30, and the number from the 1040A, I'm sorry, for us, since we're using 1040A, we're going to write the number 0 here. That's what the instructions say. For those of us that are using 1040A filers, please enter the number 0. And then we'll subtract 2 from 1. This is the number that we're going to report here in step 3. So let's just double check. If I go out to the 1040A that I was working on earlier, find line 30. All right, the number for line 30 was 14,871. So I would have written 14,871 here, subtract the number 0 here, and write the result here, number 3. This is the value that we would enter back on the form 2441. So the number that gets entered onto our form is the value that was used on line 30, after all, 14,871, I believe. Let me double check that. Yep, 14,871. And finally, step number 11 says to enter the smaller of line 9 or 10 and report that onto the 1040A form in line 31. Well, the smaller of these two is pretty clear, 600. So 600 is the number that we've got to change line 31 to back here. So when we skipped this yesterday, we wrote the number 0 in its place, but now we're actually going to write the number 600 in its place. So let's see how that's going to affect our taxes. Even if we don't do anything else with these other credits, the instructions for line 36 says to add lines 31 through 35. Well, now when we do that, we get a number 600. And if we follow the instructions further, subtract line 36 from line 30, now we get to perform a subtraction. We get $14,271 here. That number carries down, 14,271. In the eyes of the government, this is the amount of money that we owe in taxes now instead of this number. We got $600 off of our tax bill by just completing that form. We still paid $14,900 in taxes, so when we subtract 14,964 and the new number in 39, we don't get a refund of $93, but we get a refund of $693.64. Now you tell me, is it worthwhile to go download an extra form and read the instructions? If the Omars had done that, they would have gotten an additional $600 back in a tax return. Something to think about.